let me start this one more time on this dairy malts thing, because you remember one of the first things that we knew that was really injurious at some of these places.
He's there.
Okay, got you. Some of these places that were selling this at convenience stores was the bath salts and the K2, the K2, whatever it was, and all of that stuff, and it was scary as hell. And Scott is with us, and I hope he can hear this. Scott, can you hear me, sir? Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. This is from Derek Maltz, and I just played this, but I want to just play just a little bit more, just to give you an idea what we are up against as far as crime in this country.
Now, in Mexico, they're using all of that money. They're building up capabilities. They're buying weapon systems. They're dropping C4 explosives on their adversaries. I went down to the border, and there were 9,000 drones coming into America surveilling our brave men and women in Border Patrol.
So when you've got that kind of money, come on. I mean, these people are dropping explosives on anybody that's going against them. I mean, and they're working with China. As China's sending to them, Mexico's getting across the border. What the hell are we doing? There is a cancer that is integrated into our political blood system. Don't believe for a moment that some of these people are not tainted down there. You got to wonder who it is. I mean, because, listen, when a cartel member says, I know where your family is, I know where your little girl goes to school, I know her name, I know her birthday, and don't think for a moment some of that is not happening as they integrate into our political system in this country, and it is scary of what's going on. And Scott, I don't see any fight against this from the border to anything else, and I know we got a multitude of things talking about it, but I'm looking at your resume, and, man, you've been involved in this in a long time. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, Paul, when it comes to the border, I think we can draw some similarities to what we're seeing just with crime in general across the nation. If you look at the way the left approaches, say, the border, for instance, where it's running off of emotions, the focus on the border, the current policies of the administration are not on protecting our citizens. And that we can draw that parallel when it comes to criminal justice reform. But when we're dealing with issues outside of the border, public safety has to be the primary and only major focus of any criminal justice policy, any, if you want to use the word reforms, but any changes that we enact to make the system better, to make the system fairer, to make the system more effective. But the issue at the border is alarming. And I think it shows what happens when leadership is not strong, when leadership does not do what it's intended to do. I mean, this is the function of government, whether it's to protect our borders from outside enemies, so to speak, or to protect our citizens from other citizens who are committing crimes.
We've received this wisdom from a lot of people all through our youth and even continuing today that there are forces out there, our adversaries, that are willing to be patient and wait generations to destroy us from within. And you can see that happening now. And I'm amazed why some people can't see that. And it is really, really scary for the next generation. Scott, for folks who don't know this, have over 12 years of work experience and child welfare specialist, juvenile probation, parole officer. I was just like, I'm looking at all the things that you've been involved in. Former instructor with the Peace Officer Standards and Training Certification, taught at Probation Parole Police Academy, graduated from LSU, and on and on and on and on. So you've been involved in this in a long time. For folks who don't know and haven't been aware of what's going on with Right on Crime, give me a little thumbnail sketch of the mission statement from that organization.
Absolutely, Paul. As I mentioned earlier, Right on Crime is a conservative organization that seeks conservative solutions to criminal justice policies, with our focus being on protecting the public, ensuring and restoring victims, making them whole, reforming offenders as well, which is a key component to reducing recidivism, and ultimately saving taxpayer dollars. It's not all about cost, Paul, when it comes to public safety. It's a function government must perform, and we really can't put a price tag on it, but we can be efficient, we can demand results, and we can make sure that every dollar we spend in the criminal justice system is towards a result, not based on emotion, but based on following evidence and best practices.
So how are you doing? I mean, are you having any success on this one? Because we've been talking about this for a long time as far as recidivism is concerned, and we're really not writing the book on this now. It's been written a long time ago. We know what to do. But are we doing that? Are we achieving any success at all?
You know, Paul, at the beginning of this year, the Corrections and Criminal Justice Oversight Task Force submitted a report, their January 2023 report that outlines the efforts they did during 2022 in Mississippi. There are a lot of recommendations in that report, starting back from 2013, that have not been implemented. They've either passed the legislature, but they have not been fully implemented. And these are things that are critical to reducing recidivism. For example, there's one of the issues was creating basically a case plan for individuals who go into prison, preparing them, ultimately for their reentry. That has not been implemented. And what has happened, we hear from the parole board, is that individuals, and we're talking nonviolent individuals that are coming in that go before the parole board, and they haven't done the basic programming. They go in front of the parole board and then they're sent back because this initial case plan has not been created or worked with them. And this one takes time from the parole board. The parole board has to waste time having this hearing, knowing that these things aren't done. And we're not talking about an individual who chose not to do the programming or not to follow a plan. We're talking about plans not being implemented. Commissioner Kane says that later on this year they will start or start. They're in the process, and hopefully these things will be implemented by mid-year. But this is crucial. When people come into prison, the first thing that should begin is preparing for their ultimate release. We know that 95% of those that go into prison are going to come back out. And what we want them to do is come out better than when they came in, but have an effective use. Yes.
Let's take just an example. A guy goes in for armed robbery. Let's say it's 15 years, armed robbery. In the first year, what you're basically saying is you're almost like an employee. You're evaluating their talents and everything else, how you can get them up to the next level. What you're doing is on a prisoner saying, all right, if you behave yourself and if you're committed, here are the things you need to do. We'll put you to job. We'll train you. We'll if you don't have your GED, we'll get this done. Is that what you're talking about? Basically, have a plan to when they get out, they're going to be better prepared to stay out.
Absolutely, Paul. And the armed robbery example is probably not the best one to use. Let's take there's about 28% of the prison population right now at MDOC are in for drug-related offenses. Those 28%? We should.
Wow.
28, Paul. Those we should know that there's some sort of substance abuse issue. So developing a plan from the beginning, working towards them addressing substance abuse, and maybe there's something deeper than the addiction, but trying to address those core issues that brought them into the system in the first place. That way, when they come out, they don't become one of the 30 to 50% that are going to reoffend and return to MDOC. And that's where we can make a better, effective use of our money and the time when individuals are in prison.
I would think, and the reason I'm a little pushback on this, and I would think most of those programs that are available there are available without anything written down. I mean, if they want them, I guess somebody's got to sit there and say, here's what's available. But from my understanding and the many conversations that we've had with the commissioner, Commissioner Kane, is most of that is already presented to them. As far as drug addiction, I would think number one, because they are in forced isolation, that's going to be a big part of helping them get off of it immediately. So we'll talk more with Scott Peyton coming up next. Talking with the one and only Scott Peyton, State Director of Right on Crime. And just because a lot of our problems emanate from Washington, D.C. and lack of leadership, I want to throw this in here just for everyone to hear this. This is Tom Cotton, Senator Cotton is from the great state of Arkansas, and he was interviewing or grilling our Attorney General of the United States of America, Merrick Garland. Here it goes.
That's specifically to individuals on gangs where the country was unable to protect the person. That's what it was about. It wasn't about violence in general.
Okay. Well, you're partly responsible for protecting Americans. So let's see. Honduras' government can protect its own people, except for 36 out of every 100,000 for murders. Guatemala, 17 out of every 100,000. The murder rate in New Orleans last year was 70 for every 100,000. What about St. Louis?
Again, it's very high.
68 per 100,000. What about Baltimore?
Also very high.
58 per 100,000. Should American citizens in places like New Orleans and Baltimore and St. Louis begin to seek asylum in countries like Honduras and Guatemala under your asylum principles?
We know what it is in New Orleans. Scott, is that part of the situation there as far as when you're trying to work within the states? And I know you guys do a good job on that one, but that you are running into a lot of the source-appointed DAs, and are you working on anything to correct that problem?
Paul, sorry, I'm not a pilot, so I cannot answer that question.
Yeah, well, apparently you were listening to a couple of earlier, so there you go.
Absolutely. Yes, Paul, this is such a complex issue, and there's so many factors that play in. Obviously, in cities like New Orleans, they have seen an exodus from their police department. No one wants to work for the conditions they fall under, and just all what we've seen across the nation since 2020, the lack of respect for law enforcement. I served over 10 years as a law enforcement officer through probation and parole with my local sheriff's department as well. When we were in the academy, there were different levels of force, and the first level of force was officer presence, and just seeing law enforcement out and being in the streets has an immediate effect for certain levels of crime, and it also helps build our trust and our comfort level while we're out there. So, the issue is complex, but we have to support our law enforcement. We have to have the good men and women in blue out on the streets, but then they have to feel confident that when they make an arrest, that the district attorney will prosecute, will look at the facts and bill or charge that person with what they actually committed. And when we look at areas like New York, where the bail, where anyone is getting released, no matter what, they commit a crime, they're being released without any bail. Those are issues. And those are issues that we're looking at, where bail needs to be based on risk. And also working, we have a whole network within Right on Crime that is working on prosecutorial reform, making sure that prosecutors, because prosecutors have a wide range of discretion when it comes to charging individuals. Sometimes we see the pendulum swing too far to the right. Sometimes we see it swing way far to the left. And it's those practices we've seen of recent where it swings too far to the left, where we see the immediate consequences of their inactions.
I'll say this also, when it is a cultural problem, those are the ones that are hard to fix, because the fix is almost generational, and it's very, very difficult. To case in point, we do have this employment problem now after the pandemic, and this administration has made it even worse to nurse these people at stay home and a dependency. But we have a story in the stack this morning that we have another hospital in the state, I think it's Singing River down on the coast, that is stopping delivering babies. Nobody wants to be an obstetrician to work anymore. So you have the same thing in the police officers. So again, multicultural against different occupations out there, not only law enforcement, but boy, it is killing us there. So any other jobs or any other of those statutes you were talking about that need to be changed, or laws that we had on the books or what we need to put on the books that the legislature hasn't passed that you can think of, that maybe any that are remaining alive in this session?
Paul, we're continuing to work through the lieutenant governor's package of bills, those that are They're making it through committee or made it out of committee, and trying to make sure that I understand the intent of the lieutenant governor, and I'm glad that these bills were brought. Carjacking, these violent crimes are plaguing the nation. So getting them out and getting that conversation started and going is great. We need to see where those bills end up, but we also need to make sure that being tough on crime should relate to positive results where we lower our crime rate.
I got to ask you this:
those are the issues we need to work through.
And we've mentioned several times those bills that are still alive out there as far as dealing with crime. Are you saying that your organization is against the stiffer penalties on some of these?
In general, we would be against mandatory minimums, which would take away the discretion from the judge. If there is what we call a safety valve, Paul, where in certain cases the district attorney could look at that or the prosecutor could look, and if there's some unique circumstances that they could override that mandatory minimum. Obviously, carjacking is a horrendous crime. I mean, it's a violation of every. We all drive almost every day. No one wants to have this happen. So those that commit those crimes should be put away for a long time, Paul. But it's hard to put this one size fits all when it comes to the criminal justice system.
Well, do the current bills, wait a minute, do the current bills allow some flexibility from the judge's perspective? Because we went through this on the 85% rule, which everybody thought was a great idea back then. And I was one of the voices that said, I don't think this is right as a conservative. I think there are cases where you need to leave this to the judge with some parameters, of course. But are you saying that there are no parameters from a judge, no flexibility from a judge in the current law?
In what's being proposed by the lieutenant governor, unless things have changed in committee, I have not yet seen a safety valve provision that would allow a judge to look at or a prosecutor to look at the circumstances when it comes to billing.
Scott, what is your take on the other part of this? A lot of people are not talking about is we got criminals moving into the prison system younger and younger. What are we doing with these juvenile offenders, and what are some states doing better than we are?
Paul, I was a juvenile officer for a little under 3 years, and I can tell you that was the most difficult job when it comes to addressing the root causes, to addressing the issues that are affecting our youth. And matter of fact, as an officer, I can tell you I was more afraid of juvenile offenders than I was of adult offenders, because there was a lack of understanding of consequences, a disregard for authority and for life in general, and that scared me. At least the older individuals, those my age and older, I think had an appreciation for consequences. But some of the younger individuals I dealt with were quite scary. And it's, as you mentioned earlier, there's no one single solution, no one bill that we could pass that would make things better immediately. There are a lot of underlying issues when it comes to juveniles, the breakup of the family, having role models, the structure within the home. That there were so many issues, Paul, that you would be shocked. I was in the homes of these individuals and seeing the conditions they lived in. I'm not making excuses for them, but I can understand why there's no structure, there's no respect for authority, because it's not starting in the home.
Well, I'm thinking while you're saying this, Scott, of what does a 135-pound teacher, the first-year teacher, I shouldn't have said pounds, what is a young teacher who comes into the school and she's teaching 8th or 9th graders? If you're afraid of some of this, can you imagine what her life is like when she's decided that's what I want to do, I want to teach, but it's got to be scary sometimes.
I sat in elementary schools. Meeting with offenders, and I know parents would have been just alarmed knowing that an armed probation officer, was meeting with an 11, 12-year-old that committed violent crimes. So.
If you want more information, go to @RightOnCrime, or his Twitter is @ScottPayton1. Scott, thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much. Good luck on it.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate